executive visual effects supervisor for Fuse Effects. You all know Fuse? We have David Strapinis. Lots of incredible movies that he's worked on as well.
Not 3 Academy Awards, though. So.
Well, but still really important. Don't forget that. And of course, you met Kyle. Kyle has his own company called Set Anywhere. Very, very familiar with the system. And Colin Green at the very end. Just a couple of words real quick. So Colin was the founder of Pixel Liberation Front. You all remember that? He is a previs supervisor. And I talked about, let's see, David is a visual effects producer, previs, I love this, postviz, cinematographer, and VFX mercenary and filmmaker. Sorry, I lifted that.
Yeah, well, the reason I'm here is I was the operator on Avatar for the virtual production system there, and I've been basically doing this for like 10 years. So that's the relevant information. Right.
So we've all seen the demo, right? Pretty impressive demo. Right, I think the rack focus for me really got me. That was amazing. I mean, I've seen some of the other stuff, but that truly hit it home. It marries to really show that how realistic this is. You don't even know what's real and it isn't. And I got to say, Once Upon a Time is a show that I've seen since the pilot and on. And I actually often used to say, how did they? This is an ABC TV show. How are they doing this on the kind of budgets that I know they have? So one of the things we wanted to talk about, keeping this away from where we are today, and we all know. I think most of us know where pre-viz came from, where virtual production has moved into. We'd like to really concentrate more about, I think, where this is going from a creative side. What does all this mean, and what does this mean for creatives from here going forward? And we'll touch on a lot of different things, including the game engines and things that have made this possible. But I wanted to kind of open this up and first actually talk to Jim and ask Jim, on the spot, where do you think this is all going?
Good question. Well, the more that the Unreal Engine becomes real, the more we'll be able to utilize it. For instance, we just did a sequence on 911 television show, and it was their big earthquake sequence, buildings collapsing, and people running around, and so the producers came up to us and said, here, we got this big sequence. We have about 200 shots of these buildings and guys falling off the buildings, and we need it done in 2 weeks. So literally, we had to we did something like 450 man hours man days in 10 days. So we just had to throw tons of people on it. So the ability to have things like Unreal Engine, where we're able to do this in real time or realish time, would be phenomenal for us, and
So and that's something that I would like actually someone else could take this. How has this really changed things as far as how realistic this has been based on the processing power of the GPU? Where is that going? I know there's different philosophies. Is it going to be real time all the time, or will we keep throwing more complex stuff at it until it bogs it down?
Yeah, this is because a comment I made earlier. There's a lot of hype around the Unreal Engine, and it's awesome, and real time is great, but it's kind of like VFX and graphics are a lot like the hard drive, where my first hard drive was 50 megabytes, and I thought I'd never fill it up. And I have 47 terabytes online at home right now. That's just for my home server, and I need to buy a new hard drive soon. So whatever the complexity of any scene is, we're always going to be upping the ante. And the bottleneck is going to become the full system, right? So if you can render a frame in 1/24th of a second, but it takes you 7 minutes to load in your fluid sim, it doesn't matter that you can render that like that. The full system has to be taken into account for the complexity and everything like that. There's always going to push it beyond its limits, whatever those limits are. So there's obviously incredible technology coming out. NVIDIA has its new Turing chipset with the RTX libraries, and I'm getting nerdy, I'm sorry, about doing like ray tracing in real time and that kind of stuff. All awesome, will all push the boundaries of what we can do, but as soon as you push the boundaries, people just keep changing where the goalposts are.
I've heard some statistic that basically rendering like what Pixar did in the 1980s, each frame took about 20 minutes. Now today, with all the massive computing power that we have, each frame takes about 20 minutes. Because they didn't use the time or the power to make things faster, they used it to make it look better within the same amount of time, because everybody was accustomed to waiting 20 minutes for a frame. And so the more power that you give somebody, the more they're going to put into it before it chokes.
I guess I think of this in terms of a bit of changing the game in terms of what stories we can tell in a visual form. And one of the most exciting pieces to me has been seeing some of the groups early on with our first system got it and jumped on, and that's what made a number of these television shows work. Once Upon a Time and Pan Am and V, etc. Is a small number of people realized that all of a sudden one of the limitations was gone, and now we can creatively open that. But it was a relatively small number of people who got it. And what excites me the most now is trying to expand that to make it more available, and to see more of these kinds of very visually rich stories. I want to watch them, and work to make that more possible.
That's the big thing, is the democratization of the technology. I remember 12 years ago, oh God, I'm old, on set with a whole bunch of Sony F900s at $250,000 a piece, because they could do 1080p at 24 FPS. I went to Sammy's at lunch and I picked up a Nikon D90, which was the first Nikon that could shoot digital video. Jesus. And that was $1,400. I would assume most people in this room have a phone in their pocket that can shoot 4K video at 60 or 120 frames a second, and actually has more processing power than that they used to render Jurassic Park. You have the power, and once you put it into people's hands, it's what you do with it. Everyone in this room has access to Google Docs. I don't think everyone in this room is a writer like Steinbeck. It's just a matter of, but you can still give it a go. And so the democratization of the technology and of the thing means that if you want to write a movie like Infinity War, you're not limited by the fact that you can't do it. Or if you want to put something in Paris, oh God. But yeah.
These things always, by the way, test perfectly, and then you get to the event. It's
Get a room full of cell phones.
yeah.
Well, no, you're right. I actually came from the film days too, and there was a lot of great filmmakers out there that couldn't make a film because you needed cameras, giant cameras, and crews, and film, and bring it to the processor, and money. But now you're right. You can shoot. Anybody can have a great story and shoot it off their iPhone, and you're a filmmaker, which is fantastic.
And one of the things that it certainly was from my perspective is I remember, and I just talked to Jim a little bit earlier, I remember watching years ago on the special features of the Lord of the Rings, watching a setup where Peter Jackson was directing a cave troll fighting and using a virtual production mode for that. And I remember watching this, and this is 2000 or 1999. I don't remember exactly what year, but somewhere in that neighborhood. Yeah. And I remember thinking, oh man, I want one of those. And then discovering, well, you can't have that because you're not Peter Jackson. And so part of this, the reason I sat and started the company and built this thing, is I wanted to make it accessible. Like I wanted to take this kind of technology so that that more of us get a chance to try these sorts of things, because it's magic. I'm going to tell you, like you'd think I'd get inured to this after working on this for this long, but it's still magic, and we want to spread more of that magic. And if you want to talk to us about figuring out how to use it on your own, talk to Ken in the back there, because that's what this is about for me anyway.
And talking about where it's all going, I mean, I met you maybe 5-10 years ago. I forgot when we first met, when I brought my Roomba in and it was clogged with dog hair, right? So I was around when you were developing your first system, and I got to say it was a little clunky, and you admitted it to me, where like somebody mentioned swapping a lens took minutes, right? I forgot how much, but now seeing this system where you just put it on and rack it, that's what you want. We all know that the filmmakers, the directors, and the DPs can't wait for 1 extra second. Well, they can wait for their crew for half an hour. They can't wait for us for 1 second. So it's really great to see the progress that's being made with these systems and just, the technology. And I'd like to see your code, actually. Can we show that? Yeah. Yeah.
I'd also like to say, like, one of the great things about this system, it's an off-the-shelf turnkey system, which is the real benefit of it, because you don't need to build anything yourself. But there's a whole cascade effect of what this gives, because even if they are not using any of the on-set feed for broadcast or to film or whatever, the amount of savings you get from the data, the tracking data coming off the camera is worth it almost in and of itself. But the big thing is I, as a visual effects person, get really, really upset when people go, oh my God, there's such bad CG in that film. And it's not that there was bad CG in the film. There was one shot that was bad, and there are 2,100 that were awesome, and you just didn't notice them. And a lot of times that has to do with the fact that, well, the director wanted Spider-Man to climb up the wall. That's not to diss on Spider-Man, it's just the thing that could climb up the wall. But when the DP shot it, he took 9 seconds to pan up there, and in editorial they're like, oh, it needs to hit faster and faster and faster, and then it becomes unrealistic. Seeing things on set allows you to interact with them in a way that brings plausibility and physicality to every camera move in a way that shooting against a pure green screen cannot. Mm-hmm. And also you can light so that it doesn't, you can light with the thing there as opposed to lighting for what you're imagining, because no two people are going to imagine the same thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the key thing that makes Halide useful is that it moves the decision-making process from much later to right now. That's the main advantage, is it allows your key creative decision maker, your DP, your actors, your director, everyone to see things and make decisions about it then, instead of waiting for some guy in a cubicle a month later to try to do the layout for the shot and come up with something that makes sense. And if you postpone that process until then, you've lost your crew at that point, and who knows what result you're going to get.
Yeah, I just got off, so these guys are mostly doing real high-end feature films and all that. I just got off a 3-month French drama where I'm shooting a 1-hour-a-day TV show that's aired nightly. And it's kind of a different end of the spectrum because, if you're making Lord of the Rings, you've got all the money in the world to throw at it. If you're making a Spider-Man movie, you've got all the money in the world to throw at it until it works. Whereas the entire premise of this show that I was working on, the data had to work, the CG had to work, the system had to work because it's integral to the pipeline. The entire concept of the show would not work if it wasn't for the system working. Because essentially every single interior shot on this nightly drama show is an effects shot. They had replaced all of the windows, or they were able to be around zoo animals and things like that they couldn't get on a nightly TV show budget. And the big thing that allowed everybody to do is the DP is now, rather than, oh, I'm just going to light it kind of generically, flatly, I don't know what's going to be, he gets to look at the background and then say, oh, okay, cool, so I see there's some leaves over there. Okay, well, let me get a cookie up there, and we can get some dappled lighting. And then, oh, it's sunset. Okay, get me something tungsten over that way. And you're lighting to something rather than lighting to nothing. Or the DP gets a vision in his head, and then the guy in post gets a different vision in his head, and neither matches. And it allowed the entire post-production pipeline to go pretty seamlessly from shooting background plates to working on set to semi-automatically outputting the rendered shots for broadcast.
The other part of that is if so many people benefit from there being a real-time feedback, and not just on set but into post-production. So if you're running out, your rushes that have your full set in the background, or even a rough version of your CG characters or whatever in the background, that goes right into editorial, and they can cut to what they're seeing and not have to imagine it off. They don't have to send it off to their vendor and have their vendor spend 40% of their time throwing something together for temps just so they can edit and see if it works, and then the poor VFX people are scrambling to make something actually look good. Because if you tell me I have 3 weeks to do something, and then you come back and say now you have 4 weeks, you're going to get 3 weeks and 1 day worth of work, because I was planning for 3 weeks, not for 4 weeks. So taking time away for temps is just a BS way of working, but it's necessary for the process. This eliminates that, so you can just, if you're paying for 2 weeks of visual effects, you're getting 2 weeks of visual effects work, not a week and a day, because your 6 days were wasted on temps. So that kind of cascade effect really, really matters. The other thing is, here's a dirty little secret of visual effects. If you have a CG shot, it's probably being composed by some kid who's a week and a half out of some art school who every single shot wants to do a dolly zoom or some other thing.
The magic camera that flies through all the windows.
Because his entire cinematic education began and ended with the Fast and Furious series. And your DP, who you're paying more in an hour than this kid makes in a year, is not going to have a final say-so on all these shots. You putting the control of your creative in the highly paid hands of the people you paid to decide. The art director is deciding what the set looks like. Your DP is deciding what it's lit like, what the shot composition is. And therefore, the people who are more skilled at just executing that vision finally can spend their time doing that.
True. And as David, I remember talking to you earlier where you had expressed a potential way of planning out, using this to actually plan out how you're going to do a shoot, that I thought was really interesting. Look forward.
Yeah. So the thing, a lot of people, again, I think a lot about budgets, simply because the more money you can save on the other parts of the production, the more can wind up in my pocket in post, and that's completely selfish. But actors are really expensive if you've heard of them. Sets are really expensive if they're built in the real world here, especially here in Los Angeles. People don't want to make a $150 million movie because if it's not going to make double that, it's going to lose money. So you can go and grab a bunch of no-name, actors that you pay scale per day and just burn through pages and produce content that can get into editorial. And for $500,000, you can shoot an entire feature film in a, office in Studio City with a system, and then look at it, and it looks, not as good as a $150 million movie, but it's pretty damn close. But you can make all the editorial decisions and go to a producer or a studio and say, I'm not going to give you a script, I'm going to give you the entire movie, and you can just see if it works. And you can make all of your, you don't have to go and spend 7 months off on location, then come back and go, oh crap, we have to go for 6 weeks of reshoots, and our star now has a beard that we're not allowed to shave off, so we have to fill it in with something else on his face, and it's not really going to work right. So it allows you to bring the writing and editorial process all the way into pre-production and decide if you have a story worth telling and spending $150 million on for a lot less. I've thought about this a lot.
Yeah. So you said the previs word. Can you talk about how the previs it works from the pre-production into production, and are those assets reusable? Is this concept of a living show where basically you start and you just build all throughout? Is that a reality yet?
It's getting. Some big movies are trying to get there. I think the next iterations of the Avatar movies are doing the best version of trying to do something like that. But the key of the previous process back in my day was that you had to be as fast as possible, and it didn't matter if it looked perfect. It had to get the idea across, tell the story, get to the next shot, and be something you can cut and understand the sequence. And so the assets and the process was thought to be sort of disposable, and you can set it aside and leave it behind at some point, and then once you figure out the plan, someone else can finish it at a higher level. But I think the introduction of game engine workflows in Unreal is shifting some people's perspectives of when it's good to spend money earlier, so that the assets that you have in the real-time engine are closer to the final product, and that's money that's not spent poorly because it isn't disposable. It could be the final asset. And I think that's part of the power of using Unreal in virtual production, is to have better assets earlier and thought through better, so you don't get to the end of the shoot and go, oh, all that stuff we did before, that was fun, but now we're doing this, and it's different now, and let's make it better.
Also, iteration brings quality, right? That's just a process of every single, not just for cinema, but for everything. No one wants to drive the version 1.0 of a car. It's going to get better the more you do it. The same thing with narrative things. The way previs works now is people put together shots, and then they're reviewed by the director, and the next day they get notes, and they change the shots, and the next day there's another version of the shot 3 days later. Imagine what would happen on a set if your actor came out, delivered the line, go, not quite right, we'll pick this up, take 2 tomorrow, and then I'll decide then. You're never going to get something done. But giving a creative the idea that they can just do take after take after take in a CG world, because what virtual production does is it fulfills the lie that everyone has been told for the past 25 years that the computer does everything. It's actually a large army of people who are working their butts off 24/7 with very little sleep and way too many carbs doing this. And what this does is you go, yes, you're going to work for 24/7 and way too many carbs for before, and then you're just going to give me the set and I can walk around in it and I can do everything and you can sleep. But all the shot composition is done by the director and the DP and the producer and all that kind of stuff right then and there, over and over and over.
The big thing that I found is it lets you both, lets all the crew do what they're there to do. Like, the DP wants to light something and come up with cool and creative shots rather than like, oh, this might make the shot expensive, I shouldn't do that. You can see right there on set if it's going to work or not. And then the other thing it lets it do is, like, I was on a Mexican soap, and the costumer said, okay, I know that you said no green dresses, and she walks out with a shiny, like, mirror dress. It looked like a disco ball dress. And I was like, yeah, I know that's not green per se, but come over here, look on the keyer and see what that does. It's green to the camera. And it saves you those kinds of just stupid mistakes that cost you so much in post-production, whereas if you can see it on set and you just know that you need to throw a dude out there with a diva light and you're good to go, versus somebody's got to sit there and now roto hairs out or re-render Frodo's head, in order to do the post stuff. It lets people focus on doing things that look good rather than doing things that are functional.
The other thing is, and you saw a little of this when Elliot just kind of turned the camera and it was no longer looking at the green screen. You don't need live action at all, right? You can load in fully animated everything into the system. It's just Unreal, right? So whatever you can play back, you can shoot. So if you want to do an entire animated movie and have a DP operate on your entire thing to get nice handheld motion, totally doable. If you want to do mocap for a kids TV show that you're trying to strip out 5 days a week, you can do it and shoot it just like you would a regular 3-camera live action thing. If you want to shoot a gigantic naval battle, you can have your DP do it. It's all in the computer. So anything that's in the computer, you can shoot. And you don't have to, again, give up your highly paid creatives' input on the project.
And I'll comment on this briefly. Like the first, my experience is much more limited. But the first feature film I ever worked on was Alice in Wonderland. That's quite a way to jump. And this was a big show in 2008. And so on set, we were using our system to track cameras for handheld work, Steadicam work. General Lift was tracking the techno cranes. And there is an army of people on that project. I mean, it's just staggering to see 3 stages lit up at the same time. And what I can tell you is what we have now completely leaves what we had on that 170 million, I don't know how much it was, show. What we have now leaves that in the dust. I can tell you from direct experience that, and we can do this on operating on, budgets that we talk to like small independent projects about. Like that's the goal, again, for me.
I was going to, it's kind of a philosophical, conceptual thing, but I think to some extent, putting a green curtain behind actors tells everyone we're going to figure out that part later. We don't need to. That's going to be someone else's job later, and that's a big problem for a creative process, and it's deferring tons of decisions, like Dave has been saying, putting tons of important decisions on people not nearly as qualified to make them much later. I think that's the critical element to the success of this system, is moving the decision making to now, not and in the minds of the people who can make the best decisions, and not, oh, someone else is going to deal with that later, which I think the green kind of is code language for, I don't have to think about that.
Or you have to shoot it twice,
Yeah.
once with the actors and once with the background, you know. But
And not every shoot is perfect. There's problems. You shoot stuff wrong. Some compositions aren't the best, and some action doesn't have great continuity across cuts, and those problems won't emerge as problems until you're pretty far into it with a vendor filling in the green with something, and that's the most expensive time you're going to be spending besides maybe the shoot itself.
Anyone want to add? I know it's a very large topic about what you'd like to see in the future, but just reach far out. Where do you think this is going ultimately? Types of programming that we don't currently experience.
I think the obvious one is VR. The problem with VR is it's a 360 environment, and that's very, very hard for traditional content producers to work in and visualize and understand. And even if you're recording a full 360 in it, having tools that they're familiar with to be able to operate around and look and delve into that world will be a huge part of it. Yeah.
well, I mean, if we're talking about the future, I want to see this without fiducials, with wireless, and as simple as the iPhone is now, just be able to pick it up and start tracking, the cameras in real time.
I've also asked Elliot to start doing things like give us all the depth data from the camera and all that kind of stuff that can really, really aid into the they're doing incredible real-time photogrammetry with the tracking system. I'm kind of like, why can't we just do real-time photogrammetry with the feed coming off the camera too? That would be keen. So, yeah.
For me, the big thing is there's just so much content now that's being created on lower end budgets and lower scales. There's Netflix series, which originally, like when they first did the Arrested Development, I think they had the idea of doing a web series as like a web series, like it was for YouTube. But now there's a lot of like series on the internet people watch that are produced with no budgets whatsoever, and I think that getting these kinds of things in the hands of people on the lower scale budgets will create more content. There's going to be a lot of garbage, but there will be more content, which means that some of it will be good, and there'll be more good within that garbage.
But you get a choice out of that garbage.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, you just pick the best stuff out of the garbage.
Yeah, I mean, there's some great shows, and and then a lot of bad shows too. But you can just change the channel.
Yep. It's just the tool. It doesn't improve the content, but it just gives more people
Yep.
the access to use the tool to create the content that's in their head.
Yep.
And whether they have good or bad taste is a completely different question, but there will be more people with good taste that have access to this type of work.
I think about some of these things in that, working in Hollywood, a bunch of my friends are writers, and in the course of just hearing them, hearing a story pitch, I can tell you that I've heard story pitches for superhero, movies that were better than, and things that I've seen before. I've heard some truly remarkable stories that people have talked about that are not being made. And when you talk to people who are trying to put things through, you see immediately what the difficulty is, like the sheer difficulty of trying to put something together. And the more we can make these tools, I guess one of the analogies I like is that the Beatles can't exist before about 1950, where the original Stratocaster gets built, and Leo Fender and that group. You have to build a system that can amplify the results of a small number of people to fill a stadium. That tool means that world is possible. And in the same way, what I hope we're doing is building a creative amplifier, something so that a relatively small team can tackle a story that would normally be something that would take an enormous team. And I very much like the idea of amplification.
Yeah. On that, I mean, you're not limited by geography. That's the other thing. Not just in terms of like, oh yeah, you can be in 17th century Paris, but the people who are doing your designing, because it does take talented people to build your CG environments and all that kind of stuff. But instead of, and I am incredibly pro-union, but instead of a crew of like 25 union carpenters here in Los Angeles, you can use 3 kids in Bulgaria to build your full castle. And what that means is that you can use people from around the world whose skill sets are all the best at what you're trying to do. You know, if you're trying to do some global epic where you need to go from Paris to China to Vietnam, it would probably be really good if
You could hire people to do photogrammetry in each site.
not only the photogrammetry, but if you could have French people build your French sets, and Chinese people build your China sets, and Vietnamese people build your Vietnamese sets, because they will understand all the little things that make it feel like Vietnam or feel like Paris that you would never do as an art director here. It also means that you're not limited by visas or any kind of thing like that. Yeah, sure, you could build an entire practical set of a pagoda in Japan by Japanese carpenters and have it flown over here piece by piece to be assembled. That seems kind of expensive to me. So having it done in the computer is just a whole lot more cost effective, because we all know how imaginative and clear thinking studio executives are, that they don't need to see anything before they're going to sign off on it. That was sarcasm. This lets you see, seeing is believing. Elliot says that a lot about the Halide system, which is, you know, you watch the demo reel, it has a lot of great work on it, but you don't realize that it's not just compositing, removing the green screen, until you see the camera moving around, until you see the focus change right in front of you. That's what seeing is believing, and the same thing with the content. You see the content, you believe the content.
Anyone else add on?
I think he wants your mic.
Anything else that we have not touched on? I know we're really, I'm really interested. I think everyone else is really interested in the applications for this. One of the things that I know we were talking about is you're working on Black Sails, you're working on TV shows. There are big feature films you work on, and there are other types of shows that are TV shows. Do they vary that much with regard to how much time you have? I think I was talking to you, Colin, about Black Sails and how they really are high quality TV shows. Right now, all eyes are on TV. There's so much content out there, high quality content. Is it much different on a TV show than a feature film?
I mean, I only know from that one. That was my main TV show project that I worked on, which was done pretty much by a feature film pipeline approach at HalideFX, and I don't know how they made money on that show, but part of it was because they budgeted me to do 6 weeks of post-viz on one sequence. I finished in 2 weeks, everyone was happy, and that was it.
The thing I like about episodic, which I've sort of transitioned from features, is on features, you'd plan it. I wish I had all my life back from the meetings I had, because I'd be 28. But so we'd have these big pre-production meetings. You'd shoot it, and everything would change from what you had in the pre-production meeting. You'd shoot something completely different. Okay, fine. Then you'd say, this is the way this is going to be. Then you get into post-production, and it would completely change again. And you're just sort of constantly like redoing it, and it's one shot is taking 2 months to do. Where with episodic, you plan it, you shoot it, the director's gone, the producer takes over, and you do it like you plan it. And I really like that sort of decision making. You get what you want. You're getting feature quality work, but there's not a lot of. I'd like it blue now. You know, it's just it's like we planned it blue. It's going to be blue. You know, couple little tweaks, but I just like the pace. We're doing about 30 shows at any one time, so we just have this sort of avalanche of shows coming through, which is pretty exciting.
And like you said, you don't have time to really go through the iterative process back and forth. It's more immediate.
Time or money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the budgets on the episodics are really thin, so you got to bid accordingly and do it accordingly. Otherwise, if we start taking longer time per their request, the budget goes up, and they're not going to do that.
Or you just can't have more time.
Or you can't have more time.
You know, I was talking to the visual effects supervisor of Game of Thrones. I asked him, how long do you have to do an episode? He goes, anywhere from 15 to 22 weeks.
Right.
And, you know, the show I did last season, we would get turnover on Friday with 80 to 120 shots due the following Friday.
Right.
You know, so it's like, it doesn't matter whether or not, the very first thing I ever did in episodic television, I did, and then the next day I asked if there are notes, and they're like, it was on the air last night. So the turnaround is totally different. And,
Yeah.
and so this, for episodic television, that's a very wide spectrum now. You know, there's a very big difference between something on True TV to CBS or NBC to HBO or Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very, very wide spectrum. So how much time, how much money, how much you can do is all very much.
Well, plus the quality of episodic is more demanding than features. We're sort of told to do 4K shows. Features are primarily 2K.
Yeah, here's a little secret. Here's a little secret. If you go and buy one of those really expensive 4K Blu-ray players and go get a whole bunch of what's it called? UHD 4K. I can tell you, I have seen 4K versions of movies. I know every single frame was 2K. They're just upscaling.
They just blow it up, yeah.
But I've worked on Netflix shows. We finaled everything at 6K. And we weren't allowed to take the CG and do a half-res render and up-res. No, everything for Netflix and for Amazon and for Hulu is native UHD. And so it's a lot harder to that kind of episodic than it is a lot of feature films.
Well, plus I went into a DI session the other day, and normally you have one of these monitors and you're adjusting the color on everything. And then I noticed I go in there and there's 3 monitors, and there's this one, and then there's a little one off to the right that's 1,000 nits. And if you know what nits are, they're values of light, brightness. So I don't know what a standard is, like 400 nits, standard TV. The 1,000 nit looks like, if you have a pinpoint of light, it looks like a laser beam shining in your eye. It gets so bright. Then on the left side was a 4,000 nit monitor, which you can't even buy a television set now that shows that. And that was, you couldn't even look at it, it's so bright. And so we're adjusting for all these different monitors. And I said, why are you adjusting for a 4,000 nit monitor? There's no television even in sight. And they said, well, we're future-proofing it. So they're looking 5-10 years down the line and building everything for that, so that when Netflix wants to re-show all these shows, they can just put them on, or Hulu or wherever. Fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you go up to one of our suites, you'll see the same thing. We have the X300 at 1,000 nits. There's the Pulsar at 4,000 nits.
Right.
We have the SDRs. So that's something I didn't even think about or even really entertained. And I don't know if this is the right form, but how does this play in HDR? And are people monitoring in HDR? Are they working on these shots in HDR?
I love watching HDR things. I don't like working on HDR things.
That's NG. Sorry, guys.
That sounds good. You know, and you can get 5 color specialists together, and maybe they'll all comprehend aces, together. But no single person actually can wrap their mind around it. But the interesting thing that you can, again, projecting deep into the future, is Elliot kind of said, oh, we're embedding the lens information in the audio channel. Okay, so now you have CG information being embedded into a system that's real-time rendering. So there is no reason why this has to be rendered out and put onto an image that then gets broadcast out to you or downloaded or whatever. You could theoretically think about this being rendered real-time on your set-top box, and the viewer having control over what's going on. They want to look at it in China, they can switch the background out. That's the kind of thing that can be going down deep into the future. So as Unreal gets faster and faster and the chips get cheaper and cheaper, those kind of things are going to go into it. So that, it's being rendered now at a certain color bandwidth and a certain resolution, there's no reason why that can't be updated dynamically in the future.
You stream your own environment in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
They did something like that with, what was it, the Disney Zootopia or something like that. Every country that they broadcast the movie in, they changed who the news reporter animal was. So like in Canada, I think they had a beaver, or maybe they had a moose or something like that. And then in China, they had a panda in the show. And so you could do that potentially for like all the backgrounds and locations and stuff like that.
Not only that, and again, I'm not all about money, so don't think that's the only thing. But the ease of changing out product placement in the background is incredibly easy with this kind of thing. Or changing out, updating a logo on a can. Or, I worked on a movie where the big hero at the end was in an Audi, and they decided they needed to replace it with this year's model. And, so that we had to go in and delete it, and then they decided they didn't want to do that. So it's what you can do in real time doesn't mean that it's real time and then rendered out. Real time in the future will be real time on the viewing platform, and therefore modifiable to you. So it could get scary, in terms of like, oh, well, you've used your Ralph cards to get discounts on Coca-Cola for the past 7 weeks, and you've logged into your Apple TV with your Facebook account, and we know who you are, so now he's going to be drinking Pepsi, and that kind of stuff. I mean, that's terrifying and horrible and an amazing invasion of privacy, so I'm sure Facebook is on it. But but that's the kind of thing that you like, if you blue sky out what you can do with it, it's there.
I think we're going to go to questions now. Yeah. This is not working so well. Actually, can you pop me up a little bit? I think it's working. Great. Questions?
So I have a question sort of about selling this up the chain of command. It's great that we all love the, sort of high-end interactive tools and everything, but if you have a producer that's, let's just say, cognitively impaired, what is the best way to sell this? Do you sell it as a time saver, a money saver, both? And if so, like, what metrics do you have that are published that we could go to, that you could show them that basically really confirm that this is the right way to go?
There are no producers like that.
No, I know. It's,
well, interesting enough, you did have to use to sell this and sell it hard, and the sale usually never happened. But now, just recently, I've been getting asked, can we do this sort of thing? So they're starting to sort of realize that there's value in it by themselves, believe it or not. I don't think there's anything to sort of quantify the costs and to them, but younger directors are wanting it. They're sort of getting educated to the whole process of this sort of techniques and are demanding it.
Yeah, I think it's exactly. You've got directors that grew up playing 3D video games is part of it, and DOPs. And then the other big thing that was a great marketing tool for this kind of world is Pokemon Go.
Right.
People look at that and say, well, if I can do that on my phone, why can't I do that with my $60,000 camera? And getting the ideas of VR, Pokemon Go, and video games all in somebody's head, and thinking that I can use those types of ideas to make my vision a reality has been kind of a changing thing. And I'm right there with you. Like, when I first started at Lightcraft 7-ish years ago, it was a hard sell. You had to explain to people, no, the backgrounds aren't videos that we shot and that we're moving the camera to match the to now people go like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, so this is like a Vive, right? And you go like, yes, it kind of is like a Vive, but a little better.
I think there are no published metrics. It's still a very young, it has been around for a long time, but it's still a young technology that's slowly becoming mainstream. The creatives are starting to demand it, and the producers are following along behind it. But you can go to any producer and ask them if they'd want to make a movie these days without doing previs, and not a single producer would do a big budget movie without previs these days, right? Today, literally today, is the 12th anniversary of Third Floor being founded, right? So in 12 years, they've gone from previs not being a thing for anyone other than George Lucas to every single film using it. So is this going to take time? It's putting it in people's hands, showing what they can do with it. And the other thing is having skilled operators like this guy that can show it's not going to be a money sink of some nerd in the corner wasting time as everyone on the set sits there, you know, showing what they can do and just getting up and running.
I was, hate to reveal years ago, but when I first started in the digital effects business, I did The Last Starfighter, which was a feature film done by computer. We would have to sell and sell for years to get anybody even interested in doing a digital shot in a feature. And then the same thing, things break through like The Abyss. And it's like, oh, that's a digital character. Now every show wants some sort of digital something in it, you know. So now there's not one show that doesn't have the same thing, that doesn't have some sort of effect. It could be a Merchant Irie film. Well, no, you can't because one of them died, right? But it could be a romantic comedy, and it'll all have digital effects in it somewhere. So every show has it.
Your average romantic comedy has more digital visual effects shots than Jurassic Park. Yep. Jurassic Park had 52 digital shots in it. That's it.
Right.
And we think of it as this like landmark thing of visual effects that's full of it. Yeah, Infinity War had 2,309, but you know there is a spectrum along it. But everything from digital set extensions to beauty work, it's all there. But the cost has come down, the skill has gone up, and the number of people doing it is a lot more. So as filmmakers and producers get comfortable with it, they'll see the value.
Mm-hmm. The big selling point I always try to get across to people who, especially the people who are the most resistant to it, because I've worked with old grouchy DOPs that are like, no, we don't do the green screen thing, and if you do it, that's for the nerds to do. Is why would you give up your control? It lets everybody do the best job they can with tools that they know how to use and make sure that they're going to get the results that they want. That you compose a shot the way you think the shot should be composed. You light the shot the way you think it should be lit. You put the window where you think it should be, so that way you can see this action happen right at the right time. And there's no more, well, I hope the editors have the same thing in my head. It's all about having consistent vision and control from the set to post-production. And that's the biggest selling point, in my opinion.
Yeah, I have a story about that from the Fight Club days way back. Alex McDowell was the production designer, and that was his first exposure to previs. And he usually was on a show till the first few weeks of the shoot, and then the production designer is done. He has no control over what happens after that. And he saw previs, and he said, I can get all the decision makers to approve this thing, and then my vision gets all the way to the finish line. That was his. I'm going to buy into this process because of that. So the deserialization of production process of that everyone has their windows where they're allowed to make decisions, and then they're done, and the next team comes on. And when you can use real-time or visual effects technologies to make that all one more continuous flow, that's an advantage to lots of people.
Yep. We got another question here.
Hey guys, I've been working with Digital Sputnik doing pixel mapping with LED lights, and I'm wondering how you could integrate this with the existing system that you have.
Talk about feeding renders into interactive lighting on set? Yeah, you just have to change the cameras that you're rendering out of Unreal and pop it into the system. I did that out of a Maya viewport, same thing for Jupiter Ascending. Yeah, it's totally doable. You just have to move the cameras to line up. It's actually really nice because once you calibrate your system, you're going to be in the exact right place for all of your reflections and everything like that. Not, oh, it sort of looks right. No, it'll be right.
The other kind of cheating thing I've done, because I've used the system long enough, is if I need to know where something is on set, I can take a target board. Like if I need to know where a light is, I can stick that target board on the light, and I can walk around and add that into my target map, and I'll remember, okay, number 500 is where that a sky panel is. So that way I know to map that blue light to that sky panel there, or something like that.
The other thing is the question earlier about driving, right? So you could put the panel above the car. You don't even need to feed in the green screen. You can just feed the camera out above the car and get the reflections going right across the windshield exactly correctly.
I guess this question is for Kyle and Elliot. The tracking only works indoors, or can you shoot exterior green screens without all this? How does that work?
Sure. So the tracking, the camera on that can actually, it's on a pivot, so we can flip the camera down. If we're dealing with exteriors, we'd usually put the markers on the ground to do something like that. But the mapping would work in about the same way. So we have floor targets we can roll out, and if you're doing a dolly shot, we just put it along the dolly track.
And if you're dollying, if you're moving for a Steadicam operator, or I don't know if that works with Steadicam.
Well, the nice thing about the inertial optical is we don't really care what we're tracking. As long as we can see the markers, it'll track anything from a Steadicam to hand. You saw Kel doing handheld work, but you throw it on a techno crane and it tracks the same way. It doesn't care what it's on.
You can face it backwards and put them on C-stands and whatever. Yeah.
You can man all that out of the picture after and post on.
As long as it doesn't cross real stuff, yeah.
Yeah. But we typically put them in the ceiling just because the ceiling's a nice place and it's out of the way of the scene.
You do a lot more panning than you do tilting, because there's not a lot of shots where you go from straight down to straight up. But if you're doing like a big long tracking shot, you could stick the tracker off to the side or any direction and reorient everything that way.
All right, we'll probably have time for a couple more questions.
So I was actually just telling Alan and Esther here that I think it was 2014, 15, I went to some workshop where they had a bunch of like writers, they had VFX people and all that stuff. And I brought up to the VFX team, I think it was like 5 different people who worked on huge features, if they had ever done anything with real time, knew anything about Unreal Engine, anything like that. None of them knew what I was talking about, right? So with since you've been talking to people, basically evangelizing this stuff right now, what do you think the awareness is in general in the industry for real-time rendering for VFX? Like,
I think it's 100% knowledge within the high end. Everybody knows how Avatar was made. Everybody knows how Lord of the Rings was made and The Hobbit. But what I find that people don't realize is that they can afford this on low-end budgets. That's the big thing. It's like within the TV space, it's got to be sub 10% of the people I encounter realize that this is something that they could do. They go like, oh no, that's for the big guys.
Very, very, very high now.
In the high end.
Not even in the low end. It's very high. Everyone, because all the low end people in visual effects are coming out of games, they're very familiar with it. NVIDIA spends a whole lot on PR, the awareness is very, very high. Just about 2 months ago, ILM founded ILM TV in London, and it's all Unreal Engine. So it is very, very high. The problem there is the hype is also very high, and the hype is outpacing the actual technology. There's always going to be a space for offline rendering and online rendering. That's how I prefer to think of it, because Unreal Engine is gorgeous. But to get really gorgeous, you kind of have to turn it to 11, and it's no longer really real time, but it's the same engine. But all of the R&D is first going to show up in the offline renderers like Arnold or RenderMan or whatever, and that technology will migrate into Unreal. But anyone from the VFX world who's ignoring Unreal or Unity or anything like that is it's kind of like the Unix guys who are like, oh, that Windows NT thing will blow over. You know.
Well, I was telling Elliot that I teach Unreal Engine over at Melbourne, but about half of our students are actually VFX professionals that are learning this now because they're from the standard VFX background, right? So they're learning real time, which is kind of awesome.
Right. Tomorrow's my first day teaching at Noman.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, so let's hear that.
All right, one more question actually. Oh, wait, hold on.
On that note, there's an interesting area of this where I think there's going to be a world of what I would call client-facing Unreal, and which is an interesting area because it's traditionally a game engine where it's you build it in a back room and there's a team of 400 people that are going to build a AAA game title, and there's been an online world of like flame operators and things like that where a producer sits behind a person who's being paid at a very expensive hourly rate per suite. He's like, okay, I want this guy to be this, I want this, get rid of that, and the person does that. That is going to be happening in the 3D space because of the interaction of that, and it's a new
I wonder where you heard that from.
Yeah, funny that. I wanted to make sure we didn't gloss over that one.
Well, you
the
can
big-
see by looking at the Unreal Engine, even what we were seeing today, it's there, but it's not quite there yet. There's still, as a visual effects supervisor, I know that I have to take. What's good about this is you get all the camera data from it. So you're getting the sets, but I know I have to go in and give it that extra reality that is not quite there yet, whether that's doing a matte painting or.
Even the cinematic suite that's in there now has only been there for like a year and a half.
Yeah.
The replication, all that stuff. So it's still pretty new in the fact that
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely coming.
The other really big factor in this is a man named Kim LeBerry, who used to be vice president of Lucasfilm. He founded ILM X Lab. He's back. He worked on Matrix movies. He's now head of technology for Epic Games and Unreal Engine. So that's why the Unreal Engine has really evolved in the past year and a half, 2 years into a real kind of VFX tool. That's 100% Kim putting his foot down on that.
Your kids use it every day.
And Fortnite really makes them a really great safety net. Like if side effects had Fortnite, Houdini would be amazing because it allows them to be risk. You don't have to be risk averse when you're making $3.5 billion a month. So yeah.
Jimmy, you were going to say?
No.
No. Okay. Yes, Jesse.
Just curious if you could talk about. I understand you can take the camera movement that you've tracked on set, and once that goes through editorial, you export a WAV file, turn that into a .ma file. That can be brought into Maya as a starting point for your camera move. I'm curious, is that actually being used throughout post for VFX as a starting place, and how much does that actually have to be tweaked after the fact?
100% on the show I was just on. Every single day, every single camera move would be done on set, and if there was anything that they couldn't finish with the on-set comp and it had to be re-rendered, they would take those shots because they didn't, for example, they didn't have the background made by the time we started shooting that episode. So they would take the tracking data and run it through a post pipeline so that way they can get the final shot out in time for the show that's going to air in a day or two. So every day.
What we found with the prevision work, and which is in many ways has a similar tracking characteristics, is the real-time tracking is quite good. It's not a sub-pixel lock. So if you have something where you have a very exposed, like CGI to live action scene, you'll still need to do some post-tracking work on that. But it provides a seed track that's very, very accurate. And you're 80 or 90% of the way there. However, for a huge chunk of the shots in a TV show, you're not seeing that kind of ground contact. And what we found was that 3/4 of the shots could go into the render farm and just go.
If Reel's not touching CG, it goes straight into render farm.
Yeah. The approval process for cameras in episodic television is good enough. Like, so, most camera tracks in episodic television is somebody loading the shot up in SynthEyes and hitting auto track, and then that's published. So this is actually far superior to that, because you also get lens data, which you don't get. Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you. I think we're going to wrap that up. We're right around 9:20. I just want to thank our guests. Fantastic. Elliot, Jim, David, Kyle, Colin, thank you so much for being here. Hope you had a great time tonight. Good night.